I caught my best friend having an emotional affair with my boyfriend while planning her wedding. I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to know if I'm completely losing my mind or if my reaction is justified. I'm 27F, and my best friend Chloe, 27F, has been in my life since college. We've been through everything together: breakups, job losses, family drama. She's always been like a sister to me. I've been dating my boyfriend Blake, 29M, for 3 years. And honestly, I thought he might be the one. 4 months ago, Chloe got engaged to Daniel, 28M, and she immediately asked me to be her maid of honor. I was over the moon, planning her dream wedding, organizing the bachelorette party, the whole 9 yards. Everything seemed perfect. Then last week, Blake's phone died, and he grabbed his old phone from the drawer to use temporarily. He left it on the counter while he showered, and when it lit up with a notification, I saw Chloe's name. That's when my world turned upside down. I wasn't trying to snoop, but there were so many messages from her that I couldn't help but scroll up. What I found made me physically sick. Months and months of constant texting between them. Not just casual, "Hey, how's it going" messages, but deep, intimate conversations that happened late into the night. Chloe had been telling Blake things she'd never told me, about how she wasn't sure Daniel was the one, how she felt like she was settling because he was safe and stable. Blake was comforting her, telling her she deserved to be happy, that she shouldn't marry someone unless she was completely sure. But it got worse. She was asking Blake for his male perspective on wedding decisions instead of including Daniel. She wanted Blake's opinion on her dress, the venue, even the honeymoon destination. They had inside jokes I didn't understand, and Blake was giving her advice about her relationship with Daniel that he'd never shared with me. The most devastating part? Blake had never mentioned any of this to me. Not once did he say, "Hey, Chloe's been texting me about wedding stuff," or "Your friend seems to be having second thoughts about Daniel." Nothing. When I confronted Blake, he got defensive immediately. "You're reading way too much into this," he said. "She's just stressed about the wedding and needed someone to talk to." I was being supportive. Supportive of what exactly? I asked. Her doubts about marrying the man she's supposed to love? He couldn't give me a straight answer. When I called Chloe, her reaction was even worse. She immediately went on the offensive, claiming it was just friendship, and that I was being jealous and possessive. She said Blake was helping her work through normal pre-wedding jitters, and that I was making something innocent into something dirty. "I can't believe you're doing this to me during my wedding year," she screamed. "This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and you're ruining it." I told her I couldn't be her maid of honor anymore. I couldn't stand there and smile while she married Daniel when she'd been emotionally cheating on him with my boyfriend for months. She completely lost it. She called me every name in the book and hung up on me. Now everyone is calling me the villain. Chloe told our mutual friends that I'm being unreasonable, and they're all saying I should just get over it for the sake of her wedding. Her mom called my mom saying I'm destroying a lifelong friendship over nothing, but I can't shake the feeling that this wasn't nothing. The late night conversations, the emotional intimacy, the secrets. Isn't that exactly what an emotional affair looks like? Blake keeps insisting I'm overreacting, but he won't stop texting her, and now he's defending her more than he's defending our relationship. Over the next 10 days, things escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Instead of calming down as I'd hoped, the situation spiraled completely out of control, and I began to feel like I was living in some alternate reality where I was the villain in everyone's story. Chloe had completely rewritten the narrative during this time. She told our entire friend group that I was jealous and possessive, and that I can't handle her having male friends. She conveniently left out all the details about the emotional intimacy and the late-night conversations about her relationship doubts. Consequently, our mutual friends were now treating me like I was some kind of psycho girlfriend who couldn't handle her boyfriend having female friends. They kept saying things like, "You have to trust your boyfriend, and friendships are important too." They had no idea what was actually in those messages, because Chloe had painted me as the unreasonable one. Meanwhile, Blake's reaction had become the most hurtful part. Instead of having my back or trying to understand why I was upset, he doubled down on defending Chloe. He kept saying he was just being supportive during her cold feet period. He actually used those words, cold feet, like it was totally normal for a bride to have months-long emotional conversations with someone else's boyfriend about whether she should marry her fiancé. Furthermore, the social pressure was becoming intense. Chloe's mom called my mom and laid on the guilt thick. She said I was destroying a lifelong friendship over nothing, and that I was being selfish during Chloe's special time. My mom, wanting to keep the peace, suggested maybe I should reconsider and just be the bigger person. Additionally, the wedding group chat had become a nightmare. The other bridesmaids were all still planning events and talking about dress fittings, and every message felt like a passive-aggressive dig at me. They would post things like, "So sad when drama affects what should be a happy time," or "Real friends support each other no matter what." However, what was really eating at me was that I started paying closer attention to Blake's behavior, and I was discovering things that made my stomach turn. Last Tuesday, he said he was working late, but when I drove by his office, his car wasn't there. When I asked him about it the next day, he got flustered and said he'd gone to grab dinner but couldn't remember where. Then on Saturday, he said he was going to hang out with his college friend Marcus. But when I ran into Marcus at the grocery store on Sunday, he seemed confused when I mentioned their hangout. "I haven't seen Blake in like a month," he said. As a result, I was starting to realize that some of Blake's mysterious whereabouts might align with times when he was helping Chloe with wedding stuff. Simultaneously, Chloe had also started this really gross social media campaign. She was posting all these inspirational quotes about fake friends and people who show their true colors during important times. She posted a photo of her engagement ring with the caption, "Grateful for the people who are genuinely happy for my happiness." And I knew that was directed at me. On top of everything else, Daniel seemed completely oblivious to all of this drama. He kept texting me, asking when I was coming to the next wedding event, and if I needed help with maid of honor duties. I think Chloe hadn't told him the real reason I dropped out. She probably told him some watered-down version about scheduling conflicts or something. During this chaotic period, I found out from our mutual friend Emma that Chloe had been bad-mouthing Daniel to Blake for months. Emma accidentally let it slip when she was trying to defend Chloe, saying that everyone needs someone to vent to about relationship stuff. But when I pressed her for details, she clammed up and said she didn't want to get involved. Consequently, I was starting to feel like I was going crazy. Everyone was acting like I was the problem, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I kept coming back to those messages, and I couldn't shake the feeling that what I saw was inappropriate. The emotional intimacy, the secrecy, the way Blake was more invested in Chloe's feelings than in respecting our relationship boundaries. I didn't know what to do anymore. Part of me wondered if I should just apologize and try to move on for the sake of everyone's peace of mind. But every time I thought about doing that, I remembered how betrayed I felt reading those messages, and how neither Blake nor Chloe had really acknowledged why that might have hurt me. 4 weeks after the initial confrontation, the wedding planning began revealing even more disturbing truths about the situation. The escalation continued in ways I never could have predicted, and I was starting to see that this situation was way worse than I initially thought. Last weekend was Chloe's dress fitting, and I obviously didn't show up since I was no longer in the wedding party. Apparently, she had a complete meltdown when she realized I wasn't coming. According to Emma, who was there, Chloe started crying and screaming about how I was ruining everything, and that the dress fitting wasn't the same without her best friend. However, here's the kicker. She then demanded that I pay for the maid of honor dress anyway, since it's my fault that she had to find a replacement at the last minute. She actually had her mom call my mom to ask for the $300 for a dress I'd never wear. When my mom told me about this call, even she seemed to realize how unreasonable that was. In the meantime, Blake's behavior had become even more concerning. He wasn't just defending Chloe anymore. He was actively getting angry at me for making everything about myself. Yesterday, he told me that I was being dramatic and that I needed to get over it because Chloe was under a lot of wedding stress. I pointed out that maybe Chloe wouldn't be so stressed if she wasn't having doubts about marrying Daniel, and Blake got furious. He said I was twisting everything and that I was jealous, that Chloe trusted him with her feelings. Subsequently, that conversation led to me discovering something that made me want to throw up. While Blake was defending Chloe so passionately, I asked him why he was so invested in her emotional well-being. He got flustered and admitted that he'd helped her with a few wedding errands because Daniel was too busy with work. When I pressed him for details, it came out that last month, he'd gone shopping with her for wedding lingerie because she'd had a shopping emergency and needed a male perspective. He actually went with my friend to pick out lingerie for her wedding night with another man, and he thought this was normal, helpful behavior. I felt like I was going to be sick. When I told him how inappropriate that was, he got defensive and said I was sexualizing everything and that it was just shopping. But the fact that he hadn't mentioned this shopping trip to me until I directly confronted him about it told me everything I needed to know about how appropriate he really thought it was. At the same time, Daniel had started confiding in me more, which was breaking my heart. He pulled me aside at a mutual friend's birthday party last weekend and said that Chloe had been different during their engagement. He said she was distant and was always texting someone during their dates and couple time. I feel like she's not really present when we're together, he told me. And when I ask her about wedding plans, she gets weird and says she's already talked through most of the decisions with someone else. I wanted to scream. This poor guy had no idea that his fiancée had been having emotional affairs with my boyfriend and using him as her relationship counselor. Furthermore, Daniel also mentioned that Chloe had been changing wedding plans constantly and fighting with vendors over details. He said she'd become impossible to please and that nothing was ever good enough anymore. He was starting to wonder if she even wanted to get married at all. Meanwhile, the family pressure had intensified too. My parents were now actively encouraging me to be the bigger person because they didn't want to lose their friendship with Chloe's family. My dad actually said that maybe I misinterpreted the messages and that I should give Blake and Chloe the benefit of the doubt. When I showed my mom some of the messages, with Blake's permission, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "These are concerning. But honey, maybe they both just don't realize how it looks. Maybe you should talk to them about boundaries instead of ending friendships." As a result, I was starting to realize that everyone wanted me to be the one to fix the situation because it was easier than admitting that Blake and Chloe had been inappropriate. It was easier to blame me for being oversensitive than to acknowledge that their behavior had been disrespectful to both me and Daniel. Blake suggested yesterday that I should apologize to keep the peace because Chloe was under so much wedding stress. When I asked him what I should apologize for, he couldn't give me a straight answer. He just kept saying that I should smooth things over for everyone's sake. However, I was starting to realize something that was making me sick to my stomach. Blake was more invested in Chloe's happiness and emotional well-being than he was in our relationship. When she was upset, he sprang into action to fix it. When I was upset about their inappropriate relationship, he told me I was overreacting. That wasn't the behavior of someone who was just being a good friend. That was the behavior of someone who was emotionally involved. 7 weeks after discovering the messages, everything finally exploded at the bridal shower in a way that was so devastating and revealing that I'm still processing it all. I debated whether to attend, but after weeks of family pressure, I decided to go to try to keep the peace. I thought maybe if I showed up and acted normal, we could all move past this drama. I was so wrong. The shower started normally enough. Chloe seemed surprised but happy to see me, and I was trying my best to be cordial. We played the typical bridal shower games, and everything seemed fine until we got to the "How well do you know the bride and groom" game. The questions started out innocent. favorite foods, how they met, their first date. But then the questions got more personal, asking about things like their relationship habits, intimate details, future plans. That's when everything went sideways. One of the questions was, what's the groom's biggest pet peeve? And Chloe answered without thinking. He hates when people leave dishes in the sink overnight, and he always checks that the front door is locked exactly 3 times before bed. The room went quiet because these were the kind of intimate details you only know about someone you've lived with or spent lots of private time with. Daniel and Chloe had never lived together. They were waiting until after the wedding. Then someone asked, what's the groom's favorite thing to wear to bed? And Chloe answered, those gray cotton shorts and his college t-shirt, but he always takes the shirt off because he gets too hot. The room was dead silent. These weren't things a fiancé would know unless she'd been sleeping in the same bed regularly, which again, they weren't. But the final straw was when someone asked, what's something romantic the groom does that nobody else knows about? And Chloe answered, he leaves little notes in jacket pockets and bags. And he has this playlist he plays when he wants to set a romantic mood. That's when I realized with horror that Chloe wasn't talking about Daniel at all. Those details, the door checking, the bedtime routine, the romantic gestures, those were all Blake's habits. I knew because I'd lived with Blake for over a year. I could see some of the other guests looking confused, and that's when Daniel, who had come by to help serve drinks, spoke up. Wait, he said, looking genuinely puzzled. I don't do any of those things. I sleep in pajamas, I only check the lock once, and I've never made you a playlist. The color drained from Chloe's face as she realized what she'd done. She'd been thinking about Blake while answering questions about her fiancé. Daniel asked to speak with Chloe privately, and I could hear them in the kitchen from where I was sitting in the living room. Daniel was asking her where those details came from, and Chloe was getting increasingly flustered trying to explain. Finally, I heard her break down and admit that she had feelings for someone else, but that she'd never acted on them, and that Daniel was the right choice for her future. Daniel's voice got really quiet, and I heard him ask, are you talking about Blake? The silence that followed was deafening. When they came back to the living room, Daniel looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He mumbled something about having to leave and practically ran out of the house. Chloe immediately started crying and saying that everything was confused and taken out of context. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She called Blake, right there in front of everyone, sobbing into the phone about how everything was falling apart, and she needed him to come over. I was at my family's house for Sunday dinner when Blake got that call. He looked at his phone, saw it was Chloe, and immediately stood up from the dinner table. I have to go, he said. Chloe needs me. When I asked what was so urgent that he had to leave in the middle of dinner with my family, he just said it was an emergency and that he'd explain later. That was my breaking point. I followed him outside and confronted him right there in my parents' driveway. She called and you came running, I said. Just like always. You'll drop everything for her, won't you? He tried to play it off like I was being dramatic, but I wasn't done. Do you have feelings for her, Blake? Because your behavior sure suggests you do. That's when he finally admitted the truth that I'd been suspecting for weeks. I don't know, he said, looking at the ground. Maybe, but nothing physical has ever happened, I swear. I felt like the world was spinning. Nothing physical? Blake, you've been having an emotional affair with her for months. He tried to minimize it, saying they were just friends, and that he was confused about his feelings, but that he'd never do anything to hurt Daniel. What about me? I asked. What about hurting me? He couldn't answer that. Later that evening, Daniel called me. He was devastated. Through couples therapy that Chloe had insisted they attend after the shower incident, more truth had come out. Chloe had apparently been asking Daniel if he'd be okay with Blake being more involved in their marriage. She'd suggested that Blake could be like a best friend to both of them, and that she valued his opinion on important decisions. Daniel said that during their therapy session, when the therapist pressed Chloe about what she meant by more involved, it became clear that she was envisioning some kind of ongoing emotional relationship with Blake that would continue even after she was married. She wanted him to be our marriage counselor, Daniel told me, his voice breaking. She wanted to be able to call him when we fought, to ask his advice about our relationship, to have him involved in major life decisions. The therapist said that's not how healthy marriages work. I felt sick. This wasn't just an emotional affair. Chloe had been planning to continue it indefinitely, with Daniel's permission. Daniel had called off the wedding planning meetings and said he needed time to think. Chloe was apparently having complete breakdowns daily, alternating between begging Daniel to forgive her and calling Blake for emotional support. The friend group was in chaos. Some people thought Chloe had made an innocent mistake and that Daniel was overreacting. Others were starting to see the bigger picture and realize that this situation had been inappropriate all along. My parents finally understood why I was so upset, especially after Blake left their dinner to go comfort another woman. My dad pulled me aside later and said, I see now why you were concerned. That's not normal behavior. I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship with Blake. Even if nothing physical happened, he was emotionally invested in another woman. And worse, he was invested in a woman who was supposed to be marrying someone else. 4 months later, as I reflect on the complete aftermath of this situation, I realize I never thought I'd need to write about how everything finally resolved. But so many people have been asking for closure. And honestly, I need to get the final chapter of this mess out of my head. The immediate aftermath of the bridal shower incident was brutal. I broke up with Blake that same week. I told him that whether or not anything physical happened, he was emotionally unavailable to me and emotionally invested in someone else. He tried to fight it at first, claiming he was just confused and needed time to sort out his feelings. But I told him that if he had to sort out feelings for another woman, then he clearly wasn't ready to be in a committed relationship with me. Within 2 weeks of our breakup, Blake and Chloe were officially dating. So much for nothing happening and just being confused. Apparently, his feelings became very clear very quickly once he was free to pursue them. Daniel called off the wedding entirely after their couple's therapy revealed the full extent of Chloe's emotional infidelity. The therapist helped him understand that Chloe had been planning to essentially have two boyfriends, one she was married to, and one she had an emotional relationship with. Daniel said the therapist called it emotional polygamy, and said it was a form of cheating that would never result in a healthy marriage. The financial fallout was ugly. Chloe lost thousands in deposit money for the venue, catering, flowers, and photography. She tried to blame me for the financial loss, claiming that if I hadn't made a big deal about her friendship with Blake, none of this would have happened. She actually had her mom call my mom, asking if our family would help cover some of the costs, since I was partially responsible for the wedding being called off. My mom shut that down immediately. "Your daughter made her own choices," she told Chloe's mom. And frankly, she should be thanking mine for preventing her from making the biggest mistake of her life. Subsequently, the friend group completely imploded. About half of our mutual friends sided with me once they learned the full truth about what had been happening. The other half felt that I had overreacted, and that Chloe and Blake were meant to be if they had such strong feelings for each other. Emma, who had been one of Chloe's bridesmaids, told me later that she felt terrible for not speaking up sooner. "I knew something was off," she said. "Chloe talked about Blake constantly, and it was obvious she had feelings for him. But I thought she'd work through it and marry Daniel anyway. I didn't realize how deep it went." The most vindicating moment came when Daniel thanked me for saving him from making the biggest mistake of his life. He told me that the couple's therapy had revealed that Chloe had been planning their entire marriage around her continued relationship with Blake. She wanted Blake to be their unofficial marriage counselor, their go-to person for major decisions, and basically a third party in their relationship. "She wanted to have her cake and eat it too," Daniel said. "Marry me for stability and security, but keep Blake for emotional and romantic fulfillment." The therapist said that's not a marriage, it's an arrangement. Ironically, though, Blake and Chloe's relationship imploded within 6 weeks. It turned out that a relationship built on drama, secrecy, and emotional affairs didn't have a solid foundation. Who could have predicted that? According to Emma, who heard it from another mutual friend, Blake and Chloe fought constantly. They'd built up this fantasy relationship in their heads during months of secretive emotional intimacy, but the reality of actually being together was completely different. Blake apparently felt guilty about the way their relationship started and kept bringing up Daniel. Chloe was dealing with the social fallout of being labeled a cheater and wedding canceller, and she took out her stress on Blake. The final straw came when Blake realized that Chloe expected him to pay for some of her wedding-related financial losses since they were together now. When he refused, she accused him of not being as committed to their relationship as she was, and he accused her of only dating him to avoid dealing with the consequences of her choices alone. They broke up after a massive fight where Chloe accused Blake of using her for attention, and Blake accused Chloe of never actually loving Daniel and being selfish and manipulative. 3 months after our breakup, Blake tried to reconcile with me. He showed up at my apartment with flowers and a long speech about how he'd made a mistake and realized what he'd lost. He claimed that his feelings for Chloe had been just an infatuation, and that he'd never stopped loving me. I turned him down flat. I told him that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild, and that I could never be with someone who had shown such poor judgment and disrespect for relationship boundaries. I also pointed out that he was only coming back to me after his relationship with Chloe failed, which suggested he saw me as a backup option rather than his first choice. The family relationships took longer to heal. My parents admitted that they had pressured me to keep the peace because they didn't want to lose their friendship with Chloe's family, but they acknowledged that they should have supported my decision from the beginning. "We were more concerned about avoiding awkwardness than supporting our daughter," my mom said. "That was wrong of us." Chloe's family, on the other hand, continued to blame me for ruining everything. They maintained that Chloe and Blake were just friends, and that I had blown everything out of proportion. Even after the wedding was called off and the truth came out, they insisted that Chloe had just been confused and that Daniel was too rigid to understand that platonic friendships can be intimate. Some family members still think I could have handled it better, though none of them can tell me exactly what I should have done differently. Apparently, I was supposed to just accept my boyfriend having an emotional affair and smile while I stood up in a wedding where the bride was in love with someone else. The social consequences have been lasting. Mutual friend gatherings are still awkward years later. Some people act like nothing happened, others clearly take sides, and everyone seems to tiptoe around mentioning Blake or Chloe when I'm around. Chloe moved to a different city about 6 months after everything exploded. She basically lost her entire social circle and couldn't handle the gossip and judgment. She rarely speaks to anyone from our college friend group anymore, and when she does, it's usually to complain about how she was unfairly villainized for having feelings. Daniel is doing much better. He took some time to heal from the betrayal, but he's dating someone new now and seems genuinely happy. He told me recently that he's grateful the truth came out before he legally tied himself to someone who wasn't fully committed to their relationship. "I dodged a massive bullet," he said. "Imagine if I'd found out about her feelings for Blake after we were married, maybe after we had kids. The whole foundation of our relationship was a lie. As for me, I'm doing well. It took me a while to trust my instincts again and feel confident in my judgment, but I'm dating someone new now, someone who believes in clear boundaries and open communication. I'm more cautious about friendships and relationships, but I think that's healthy. I've learned to trust my gut when something feels off, even if everyone else is telling me I'm overreacting. The biggest lesson I learned from this whole experience is that you can't keep the peace by ignoring inappropriate behavior. Everyone wanted me to just accept the situation to avoid drama, but the drama was always going to happen eventually. The truth has a way of coming out, and the longer people try to hide it, the more explosive it becomes when it finally surfaces. I also learned that emotional affairs can be just as damaging as physical ones, sometimes more so. Blake and Chloe convinced themselves that because they weren't physically intimate, they weren't doing anything wrong. But they were sharing emotional intimacy that belonged in their committed relationships, and they were making relationship decisions based on their feelings for each other rather than their actual partners. Looking back, I'm proud that I trusted my instincts and stood my ground, even when everyone was pressuring me to back down. It wasn't easy being labeled the villain, but I'd rather be seen as the woman who overreacted than the woman who enabled cheating and betrayal. And for anyone dealing with a similar situation, trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let people gaslight you into thinking that emotional affairs are just friendship. Don't sacrifice your self-respect to keep other people comfortable. And don't stay with someone who puts another person's feelings above yours. You deserve better than being someone's second choice. And you deserve a partner who doesn't need to sort out feelings for other people. The right person will choose you clearly and consistently, without confusion or hesitation. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Standing up for yourself is never easy, but it's always worth it in the end. The story is now complete, and while it took longer than anyone wanted and hurt more people than it should have, the truth ultimately set everyone free to find relationships that were honest, committed, and built on solid foundations, rather than secrets and lies.